Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. And Neil Gray, the Scottish Energy Minister, tied himself up in knots in a bit of a car crash interview yesterday. He struggled with pronouns. He called Isla Bryson, or Adam Graham, a he, before catching himself on and realising what he'd said, and immediately changing it to they. And that's the problem that the left have. They're so beholden to the woke, they're so beholden to the trans lobby and to the Greens, that they actually forget that reality is a thing. Isla Bryson, or Adam Graham, was convicted of the R of a woman. In Scottish law, that can only legally be committed by a man. And therefore, in the eyes of the law, he is a man, which is why he is doing time in a man's prison. But the left gets so confused with this because they seem to think that they must pander to the mental delusions of psychologically damaged men and deny the actual reality of the world they live in just to make sure they have the virtue points. It's ridiculous. Anyway, we'll have a look at this article to see Neil Gray sort of crashing and burning and realising he's made a big mistake, and one, no doubt, he'll have to pay for. Here goes. So Neil Gray calls double R of women Isla Bryson he in car crash interview as he struggles to defend gender court battle. Humza Yousaf's campaign manager and Scottish Government Energy Secretary struggled with calling Isla Bryson just an R of women as he went against the SNP book by calling him a man. And as I say, he is a man. He is biologically a man. He's physiologically a man. He's still intact. He's had nothing cut off and nothing added. All he's done is put on a bit of a shitty wig and called himself Isla. Humza Yousaf's campaign manager Neil Gray got himself into an almighty mess as he called the double R of women Isla Bryson he in a car crash radio interview. Understand that YouTube doesn't like the R word, so you have to use a term. One of the new First Minister's closest allies, the Energy Secretary, struggled to defend his government's decision to take the UK government to court over its controversial gender reforms. Now, Humza Yousaf met Rishi Sunak yesterday. First thing out of his mouth was independence referendum. Second thing out of his mouth was we're taking you to court over the Gender Act. That was it. They were the two things he got. First, bang, bang. That was it. So obviously this Gender Act is so important to Rishi Sunak. It's something that they're not going to win. He's going to court and he's going to lose, and he's going to waste millions of pounds on doing it because, you know, he's an idiot. But even his own ministers can't even follow the party line. So anyway, the taxpayer could be charged up to £500,000 due to the SNP decision to launch a judicial review into Scotland Secretary Alistair Jack's usage of Section 35 to block the Gender Reform Recognition Bill becoming law. Actually, it's likely to be more than this. They've already said it's going to take something like 20 weeks to go through, and given the rate at which barristers charge, it's likely to be a lot more than £500,000. I think that's a very conservative estimate. But it revolves around the fact that it could affect the UK-wide Equality Act, as it allows trans people to legally change their gender if they live that way for a minimum of 3 months, which goes against UK-wide legislation. And in fact, there is now a move to clarify the 2010 Equality Act to make it specific that where they use the words male and female, they mean biologically, not gender-wise. And it is a clarification there. But anyway, fears have been raised that predatory men can use this to access safe female-only spaces, such as changing rooms, toilets, and in some cases prisons. There's no fears. Fears is not the right word. This has happened. And there is an example of someone, a man, who actually ended up in a woman's prison. But we've seen them. We've seen them going into toilets. We've seen them going into changing rooms. There is a story about an American one who said that he is going to become armed, and if any woman challenges him from going into a female-only space, he will use the thing he's armed himself with. I mean, that should be criminal. That man should be in jail immediately for making that threat. But hey, that's America for you. But that's where they're going with this. Oh, look, and there's his very tiny lady penis poking out. You can see that. No wonder he wants to be a woman if that's all he's got. Anyway, one of the most high-profile cases was when Isla Bryson, who is a man called Adam Graham, was sent to a woman's jail after self-identifying as a female, and we'll put brackets in there so that he could have an easier time in prison because they don't like auras of women in prisons. A number of key Scottish Government figures have failed to say whether he is a man or a woman, as it would blow holes in their legislation, with Nicola Sturgeon struggling when quizzed before she resigned. I remember that, and she said he as well. But they can't call him a he, and they can't say whether he is a he or a she, because anything they say will be wrong. They've got this act to get through. They don't even understand their own act. The United Nations even said and got involved that it was a terrible act, and it needed referring back. This is how bad it is. But the trouble is, of course, it was pushed through by the Greens. That's the case of the tail wagging the dog. And the Greens push this. And it's costing the SNP dearly. So it's great. Keep going with it, because all you're showing up is how stupid you are and how awful you are at running a country. Anyway, now Mr. Gray has massively slipped up in an interview with Justin Webb on BBC Radio 4's Today programme, as he called Bryson he, before then trying to refer to them as a aura of women instead. He was asked whether the Scottish Government worked out in its own mind whether the convicted aura of women, Isla Bryson, is a man or a woman yet. Mr. Gray responded, well, Humza Yousaf has already said during the leadership campaign that he believes that Isla Bryson was at it in terms of the way that in which they appear to try to portray themselves, and at the end of the day, Isla Bryson is an aura and has been treated as such within the Scottish prisons. Even he's calling him they because he lacks the balls to call that a man. Yes, that's the problem they have. That is not a woman. And it doesn't matter what he calls himself or how many frocks he puts on. But when pressed further on whether Bryson was a man or a woman, he said, I've already said, in terms of Isla Bryson was convicted as, was a man when when they committed the R, and Humza Yousaf has said that they were at it when they were attempting to portray themselves as something different. So he says he. He knows it's he. He knows in his own mind it's a he. But the party line is, I can't say he in case I upset people or get something wrong. Because the difference is, you've got him referring to he because he's actually, a human being who looks at this man and says, yeah, that's a he. And then you got him as the politician who goes, don't call him he, don't call him he, don't call him he. Because we've got to maintain this bullshit. It's madness, isn't it? If you have a government minister who doesn't know the difference between men and women, you've got to question why he's given authority and position of power to do anything. If you're so stupid you cannot tell the difference, then you shouldn't be in the job. It is a stark admittance from a government minister, as Mr. Yousaf, Jenny Gilruth and Keith Brown have all refused to say what gender the offender actually is. Because they daren't. They're frit. They are scared of what the Greens will do to them. Any real leader, anyone with a pair of balls, would turn around to the Greens and say, look, you've got two ministers. That's what you've got. You can enjoy them or you can quit. But we're not going to push ahead with this. And then watch what they do. And let me tell you, they'd rather be on the tent pissing out than outside pissing in. And so they'll go, oh, grumpy, grumpy, grumpy. But they'll keep their seats and they'll shut up. The Scottish Tories blasted Mr. Gray as they described the interview as a car crash and pointed out the almighty mess that he'd gotten himself into. Did I just say gotten? God, I'm turning into an American. Scottish Conservative Equality spokesperson. I always prefer spokesman, even if you're a woman. But anyway, spokesperson Rachel Hamilton, MSP, said, months on from this case first hitting the headlines, the SNP ministers still can't bring themselves to refer to this double aura of women as a man. The refusal of politicians to say what is self-evidently true is hugely offensive to Bryson's victims and exasperating for the public. It's an insult to women everywhere. Because he is a man wearing woman face to try and get an easier time in prison. Didn't work out in the end, but that's all it is. And if I was to put on blackface, I would be ridiculed and slated. So what is the difference between that and putting on woman face for exactly the same thing? It's wrong. But the reason Humza Yousaf's campaign manager tied himself in knots is because conceding that Bryson is a man would totally contradict and undermine the SNP's flawed gender self-ID policy, and so we're left with Neil Gray's absurd equivocation and the implication that the ARA is somehow an alternative gender. The SNP should be amending Nicola Sturgeon's reckless gender reform bill rather than spoiling for a legal fight over it with the UK government in a desperate attempt to divert attention from the chaos and splits in the party. She has got that dead right. But it is an affront to women, and it is a danger, because allowing that to identify as a woman, and then he, a convicted ARA of women, would be locked under Scottish law, would be locked in a cell with vulnerable women. And he's got everything intact. You've just seen his very tiny lady penis poking through his tight trousers. That should never be referred to as anything other than a man who Rs women. And all of them are the same. And the rate in prisons for transgender prisoners who have committed sex crimes is 10 times higher than in the general pop of normal men. Trans prisoners are 10 times more likely to be sex offenders. That is very telling in its own right. And why, we have to ask, do these people always, when they switch to become, I'm a lady now, always want to be, I'm a lady but I'm a lesbian? It's because they're all straight men. Anyway, I shall round off and come up. It's no wonder there's so much confusion around this bill when the people who are trying to push it can't even agree to use the terms they claim that people have the right to use. They're calling men men. It's madness. Honestly though, they are just dumb, aren't they? It's quite clear that these people, and I mean here the SNP politicians, are quite incapable of understanding the very concepts of governance. They make outrageous claims that people can easily change who they are without a shred of evidence. And they're taking away any kind of medical or psychiatric examination that would be required for this. The worst of it is, of course, you're going to have people, especially young and vulnerable people, pushed down on the trans train. They're not trans, and nobody can stop them because there's no oversight, there's no safeguarding for people. They'll just get held by the trans lobby and pushed down. They'll be administered medications, they'll be pushed into surgery, and yet a psychiatrist would have said, actually, you're not trans, you're depressed, or you're in grief, or there's something else, you're the subject of a bullying campaign, anything. There could be many, many things, but the SNP haven't even figured out that that could be a problem, and so they keep pushing this gender bill, and then their own ministers can't even use the terms they're supposed to use because it is so stupid. Human nature is human nature. You look at things and you call them what they are. You don't pretend it's something it's not. It's just ridiculous. Anyway, I shall round up there. Thank you very much for listening. If you like what you're seeing here on the channel, please hit the subscribe button down there, ring that bell, leave a like, leave a comment, please share the video, and until next time, stay safe, stay well, just make sure who's in the changing room with you, and goodbye.